everybody, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Ed Puzzles. Today's daily objective is describe Darwin's 5 principles of evolution.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Ed Puzzle Notes. This will be a very short edition of notes. Now remember that we have very few class periods left. So if you want your grade to go up or stay the same, I highly recommend paying attention to these notes. Pay attention during our activities, our computer simulations, and our labs. If you want your grade to go down, if your grade is too high, if you've got an A and you want a B, or if you got a D and you want an F, do not watch this. You may accidentally learn something. So, hopefully you guys want your grade to go up or at least stay the same. So here we go. These are Darwin's 5 principles of evolution by natural selection. Now, these are really important terms and ideas, and it will eventually turn into a short answer / essay question, which is usually our favorite because you can get a ton of extra credit. But like always, it is very, very difficult to guess on short answer / essay questions. Well, the first thing Darwin noticed when it came to wild populations is that there is variation. Darwin observed that there are a variety of different traits within populations of the same species. So up here on the top right, we have a bunch of male African lions. They're all males, but you can see some of them have these, the traditional mane that you see. Some of them have kind of like wimpy manes, kind of like some guys can't grow a full beard. Same thing with these lions. Some of these males down here, they don't even really look like a male lion. They look more like a female lion. So there's variation amongst lions. Now, if you were a female lion, you may think that lions like this, these more masculine looking lions, are more attractive. And that's what's called sexual selection. So guys like, lions like these may have a better chance to mate with the female lions than this little poor guy right here that actually looks like a female lion. Another thing that Darwin noticed, that in the wild, far more offspring are produced in the wild that can actually survive. That means, I don't know if you remember from ecology, but biotic potential, that is the total amount of organisms that an ecosystem can support, but it exceeds the carrying capacity. So basically it means that in the wild, there is a struggle for existence. It's hard to survive. It's hard to find food. People today in the modern world, it's not hard to find food. You can go to McDonald's, Burger King, whatever. And it's also easy to avoid predators. Very few times when we're walking to school or whatever, does something try to eat you. But if you're a turtle swimming in the ocean, things are constantly trying to eat you. And you have to constantly try to look for food. So, most things don't live. If you're a sea turtle and you go and you lay your eggs on the beach, only about 1 out of every 1,000 of your little baby sea turtles are going to make it to be an adult. So the vast majority of them are going to die. Why do most of them die? And what makes that one survive? Well, because they have adaptations. There's something about them that made them a little bit more adaptable to their environment. They were able to survive in their environment. And the next 2 of Darwin's principles of evolution by natural selection, he determined that in the wild it is a struggle for existence. Like I was saying on the last slide. There are limiting factors. This was a long time ago we did ecology, but limiting factors are anything that control the size of a population. So the amount of food, the amount of water, the amount of space, predators. Those are all things that limit the size of a population. So in the wild, these organisms, these animals, plants, they're always competing. They're always in competition. A lot of you guys are athletes, so you know all about competition. If you play baseball, there's only 9 people that can start. Football, only 11 can play at one time. Track, I don't know how many people can play. Cheerleaders, I don't know how many cheerleaders there are, but there's probably only one head cheerleader. And same thing with these animals in the wild. So like these eagles up here, this eagle right here, he caught something. I don't know if that's a fish or whatever, but he's got something in his talons. And this little guy, sorry, they were competing for the same food source, but this dude was a little bit faster. This guy was a little bit too slow. Now, for us with sports, if you lose competition, you sit the bench. But in the wild, if you're a little too slow, if you're not quite as good as the eagle or the whatever that's better than you, you don't sit the bench, you die. And going with that, since you're in competition, it's survival of the fittest. Now remember, fittest doesn't mean that you're in the best shape or the fastest or whatever. It's just whoever has favorable traits that have adaptations that endure the limiting factors, that you can gain resources like food, you are more likely to survive. Thus, since you're alive, you're more likely to mate and reproduce and pass on your traits to the future generation. Pass on whatever trait it is that allowed you to live. Your babies are more likely to have that same trait that'll allow them to live. So organisms that do not survive, those genes in the gene pool are lost. So, for example, if there was a baby eagle that was born without feathers, that would not be an adaptation. That gene for not having feathers would be lost in the gene pool because that little baby eagle would not live to pass on that trait to its offspring. All right, so the last of Darwin's principles of evolution by natural selection, he believed in something called common descent, which basically means that all life on Earth, we're all related to each other. We all started at the bottom of the tree. We all came from a single-celled organism that was on Earth about 3.7, 3.8 billion years ago. And from that single organism, all life has adapted and branched off into all the organisms we see today and all the organisms that have gone extinct, like the dinosaurs. So he believed, and according to the theory, that all life on Earth is related to a single common ancestor that lived about 3.7, 3.8 billion years ago. All right, so hopefully this slide will be a review because we've gone over fitness a couple times. But remember, when it comes to evolution, fitness does not mean how, in good shape you are or how fast or strong you are. But it's just a measure of your likelihood to both survive and, more importantly, to reproduce. Because fitness is all about, are you able to pass your traits, your genes, to future generations? So, organisms that are more well adapted to their environment, they have genes that give them that advantage. So over time, the gene pool can change. Alleles or traits that give an organism an advantage, those traits will become more common in the gene pool, where alleles or traits that are not well adapted to the environment will become less and less common. For example, if you live in the desert, having brown fur is probably an adaptation. It's probably an advantage because deserts are usually brown. So having brown fur will make it harder for predators to see you. Therefore, it would give you an advantage. Where if you had white fur in the desert, that would not be an advantage. Now, if it was in the snow, it would be the opposite. White would be an advantage, and that trait would go up, where brown fur would go down. So we all have variations. All species have variations. People, monkeys, birds, whatever. There's little tiny variations among, the species of population. Well, where do these variations come from? What's the origin of these variations? Well, there's three main sources of them. Might want to know this. The first one, and this is the main source of all variation, is random mutations. Remember, every time your DNA replicates itself, every now and then it makes a mistake. It makes a mistake, in the order of A, T, C's, and G's. Well, anytime it makes a mistake, that's a mutation. So, whenever you have a change in the DNA sequence, most of these mutations are neutral. So it does not change the protein that's made, so it does not change what trait you have. Now, the ones that aren't neutral, most of them, if they're not neutral, they're going to be harmful. They're going to be bad, like cancer. That's a bad mutation. You wouldn't want to get that. But every now and then, you have a mutation that's actually beneficial. It actually gives that organism a trait that increases its fitness and helps it to survive. And all the variations of traits on Earth and all the different species originated from random mutations in the DNA. Now, what are some other sources of variation? If you remember from genetics and from nucleic acids, crossing over during meiosis. Remember, that's where the genes are shuffled during prophase 1 of meiosis. When you're making your sex cells, your gametes, that is another source of variation. And the other one also has to do with meiosis, where independent assortment. Remember, when you're making your gametes, humans have 46 chromosomes, but remember, when we make our gametes, we only give 23 of these chromosomes to our offspring, to our kids, in sexual reproduction. So, which of your 46 are you going to give? It's totally random which of your 46 are going to go in to the gametes, and that's independent assortment, another source of natural variation in organisms. And just in case you forgot, this is what crossing over looks like. These are homologous chromosomes right here. And remember, during prophase 1, the homologous chromosomes all line up in a group of 4 called a tetrad, and sometimes they exchange genetic information. So the mom DNA will get some dad DNA, and the dad chromosome will get some DNA from mom. And that just increases the amount of genetic variation in the offspring. Alright, so I probably should have removed this slide because it's only one multiple choice question on our exam, which we'll take in a couple weeks. But does natural selection act on the phenotype or the genotype of an organism? Well, the answer to that one multiple choice question is it acts on the phenotype, because it is the phenotype which is your physical trait. Now, of course, it is your genotype which gives you your phenotype, maybe fur color, but it does not matter what your genes are. All that matters is what your fur color is. If your fur color is brown and you live in the desert, you will be well adapted to that environment. So if fur color is dominant and you're homozygous for brown, good, you have brown fur. You'll be doing all right. And if you're heterozygous and you still have brown fur, you'll still be okay in the desert, because either way you have brown fur. So it is your phenotype, it's your physical traits which determine your fitness in the environment. So even though your genotype gives you your phenotype, it's the phenotype which actually interacts with the environment, not your genotype. Okay, so another kind of oddball slide, because the last slide there was going to be one multiple choice question on it, and this one I'm pretty sure there's going to be 0. But anyways, maybe you're interested in it. There's some alleles in organisms that are lethal. That means if you have this trait, you die. Well, these are obviously, if you die, if you have this trait, how do those traits even remain in the gene pool? Well, obviously, these alleles have to be recessive. So, one example of this is Amish lethal microcephaly, which means you're born with a really, really small head. It's called Amish because it is common in the Amish community. It's it's even extremely rare in Amish, but in the regular population that's not Amish, it's basically unheard of. But the reason it stays around is because it's recessive. So if you're homozygous dominant, you're normal. If you're heterozygous, you have that lethal allele, but you're normal. You carry the gene, but you will not die. So the only way you will die from this trait is that you got to be homozygous recessive. So anytime there's lethal alleles that stick around, they're always going to be recessive alleles. And that is how they stay around in the gene pool. Because if they were dominant, all individuals would die and that allele would not be passed on to future generations. But since it's recessive, the carriers of that allele can pass it on to their offspring. All right, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.